Hello, everybody. Happy Election Day. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News, coming to you from my recording studio in Disney World. That's right. What better place to be on Election Day than Disney World? You thought the election was annoying. How about people who shouldn't be parents cutting you in line? How about that? Okay. Anyhow, we're going to get into a few of these stories. We've got Bachelor Nation divided on Election Day. I've been no stranger as to who I'm voting for. Hey, I think I've got enough spine to share my convictions and not worry about whatever fallout might come from people going, well, I guess I can't follow you anymore because we have different core ideologies. Luckily, we've already said goodbye to those people. We've scrubbed them away like a good exfoliation. So here we are. We've got Election Day. Hope you guys have voted. I voted several weeks ago, and most people, the masses, in some states, I think Georgia said something like 65% of voters have already voted before today. Unbelievable stuff. Now, it's going to be contentious. It's going to be contested. It's going to be a wild day, week, month, even a year. So we're going to get into what some of Bachelor Nation is saying. I love people who speak their mind and tell you what they're thinking. I understand some people don't want to weigh into politics. You know, you'll have the Nick Viles. He might share. You might have an idea of what his political opinion is, but he's got a big audience and he doesn't want to mess with that. I'm aware of that. Do I respect it? Like I said, it's a business plan. But I always say this: if you're an influencer, if you are someone who makes your living by giving commentary and sharing your opinion, why are we so afraid to share our political opinion? You know what I mean? It's like, look, you get me for all I'm worth. And that means I share my opinions on whatever the stories in the world are. Today and recently, it's been a lot of politics. Sometimes it's a lot of people trying to trap other people into fake pregnancies. Sometimes it's, what Devin did in his restraining, whatever the case may be. So we're going to get into it right now. If you enjoy what I do, the best way to support me is join the Patreon, patreon.com/Dave Neal. That is money that goes directly into the tip jar. The other best way is to follow the podcast, The Rush Hour with Dave Neal, where I'm covering all the election news. So here's what Pilot Rachel posted, again, from Florida, a state that was a swing state, but has really moved into a red state in the post-Trump era. I don't think too many people think it'll flip blue. Put it this way, if Florida is won today by Kamala Harris, then it's going to be a landslide victory. She said, and she shared this, there are more abortion measures on state ballots this year than ever before. Reproductive freedom is on the line. Get out and vote on Tuesday, November 5th. Now, here's the truth about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The truth is, and this isn't my opinion, more elections have been lost for the Republican Party since Roe v. Wade was overturned. What do I mean by that? I mean, in any election, even in very deep red states like Missouri and others, in every election, when there has been a ballot measure statewide, people have voted, and the majority of people believe in a pro-choice world. Now, what that means is taking the government out of the doctor's office. That means letting doctors and either pregnant women or people who want to be mothers or people who don't make the best choices they can for their body, for their health, and for planning their family. And there's been a lot of rhetoric about, what about fourth term abortions? They're alive and that's called murder. That doesn't happen. But as we've covered, there are plenty of scenarios where there are what is called an abortion, but it's actually really the removal of a fetus that has already passed. And there are plenty of states where, doctors are afraid to do that surgery for fear of lawsuits. And it's a wild time out there. It might not seem like a big deal, but people are dying. People are dying in a first world country where they should easily be able to get medical help, to the point where Texas is having a hard time getting OBGYNs to want to work there. It's a wild state of affairs. But I like to be fair, and in being fair, I want to share a counter side, a pro-life side. So I'll get into that in a second. Jason Tartick is sharing the betting odds. Says, happy election day, go vote. Throughout the day, I'll be providing unbiased live updates on the implied probabilities of presidential outcomes based on information currently available from Vegas odd makers. Right now, Donald Trump, if you were betting, source MGM, Donald Trump has essentially a 58% chance of winning. I'm recording this at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, and for the reason being that there were 4 votes. There were 4 different cases, I think, where people bet on Trump winning at $30 million, which heavily skewed the betting markets. Most pollsters call this a complete 50-50 toss-up. New polls are actually favoring Kamala Harris to the point where some people think it'll actually be a landslide victory for her, and they think that the polls are afraid to share that she's in the lead because they don't want to get it wrong. Again, that could be wishful thinking. Some call that hopium, the idea that you're going to feel some dopamine rush because you have hope in whichever side of the election you want it to go to. We really won't know till it's all said and done. We really won't know. My prediction is that Kamala Harris will win. Will I eat crow if she loses? No. I mean, it's essentially a 50-50 race, and elections are supposed to be hard. And that it's by all. Put it this way: when Trump beat Hillary, it was a shock. It won't be a shock if Trump wins. Derek Peth posted that he was mobilizing people and, of course, supporting Vice President Kamala Harris. So he was one of the few people in Bachelor Nation to mention who they were voting for. Daisy Kent from the Daisy brand of cottage cheese liked a post from someone who was explaining why they were, voting for Trump. They were praying over Trump. My guess is when you pray over someone, you're probably voting for them. Now, this made people upset in the Bachelor world because I'll say this, the main commenters on the internet when it comes to the Bachelor are, I would say, left-leaning, and some actually very far left-leaning, to the point where, these are the people that thought I was conservative. And again, if someone's fiscally conservative, whatever, and if you're socially conservative, sure, whatever. But in today's world, those words just mean something different. So you'll get people that are pro-Trump, and it's almost like a buffet where people will pick and choose why they're pro-Trump. The issue a lot of anti-Trump people have is that all of their moral reasons for voting Republican in the past. We want a family, we want a party that endorses family values. Well, those don't work anymore for Trump. He's had several failed marriages where he's been exposed as a cheater. He cheated on Melania when she only several months, or was she pregnant or several months after she had Barron, with Stormy Daniels. I mean, these are facts. These aren't, up for debate. So this idea that people want a party of family values, they have shifted in how they say that. Now, many are saying, don't vote for the person, vote for the policy, which to me is a scapegoat of your previous convictions, which is vote for someone who has the moral fiber in the way in which you want to lead. Now, to be honest, most people who vote on the left vote policies over person because they're not really rooting for a demigod, right? There is a cultish aspect to the true hardcore supporters of Trump, to the point where he said if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, they would be okay with it. I mean, there are, and again, it might be anecdotal, it's not all of them, but there are people that say, we support Putin, we'd rather Trump be a dictator and things like that. It's just wild how some people have a blind allegiance, to the point in which, and again, I will share a pro Donald Trump statement in a second, but to the point in which they just released audio. And I'm not going to play it because it's terrible quality, but it's real, of Jeffrey Epstein. We heard a bombshell audio tape in which Jeffrey Epstein says he was Trump's closest friend and shares a bunch of crazy stories. This barely moves the needle. Remember, Mitt Romney went down because he put a dog carrier on the roof of his car? We just got 100 hours of Jeffrey Epstein saying he and Trump were BFFs. I didn't even get an alert about it on my phone. I got no text on this, said Jimmy Kimmel. He took his sweet time, and then they talked about how, Epstein described Trump as having no moral compass. So again, I'm not trying to sway anyone's opinion. I'm just, with conviction, sharing mine, that it's just shocking. It's just shocking that people don't care about this. Now you might say, well, Kamala's husband has a rap sheet. We're not voting for Kamala's husband. Okay. We're not voting for Hunter Biden. We're not voting for Joe Biden. We're voting for who's giving us a better chance to push the country forward in the direction that we would like. Let's go to what was said by Maddie Pruitt. Now, she, I think it's very obvious, is a pro-Trump MAGA evangelical influencer. I think that's pretty obvious. Let's have a listen. Almost 1 million views, 800,000 views, talking about faith, politics, and the election.
It's because our politics today have become theological. It's not because our theology is getting political.
What is our role as Christians in all of this?
There are tens of millions of Christians who attend church regularly who are not voting.
Why do you think women have been so targeted in all of this?
Because they manipulate our rightful compassion and empathy into believing that we have to be pro-choice to be pro-woman, and it's just not true.
You don't even have to see it as a Democrat and a Republican thing. It's like, just see it as a Christian thing. It's like, hey, what is God's heart towards children? What is God's heart towards family? What is God's heart towards marriage?
It's not endorsing everything a candidate has ever done. Which set of policies is going to best stem the tide of evil? In my opinion, that's clear.
I don't know which policies they speak of with regard to Trump's policies that are going to be better for America. I don't even have much to say about that, but that's where, people are coming from. Now, we always love to share Dr. Laura Anderson, our good friend. She has a PhD in religious trauma. She says, you have permission to vote differently than how you were taught growing up. For many folks, as they deconstruct from their religion of origin, they find that they must also deconstruct other areas of their lives that don't, at first, seem obviously tied to their faith. One of those areas could be politics, especially for folks who grew up in evangelicalism, charismatic, and other fundamentalist religions. The crossover between your relationship with God was to be reflected in who you were to vote for. And now, even if you've left church or religion altogether, you might find yourself drawn towards specific candidates, policies, and parties because they are similar or the opposite of how you grew up. It's important to note that you have permission to vote differently than how you were taught to growing up. So anyhow, I love Dr. Laura and everything she posts here because she does a good job of kind of pushing back against a lot of blind faith that exists in the evangelical church world. And it's in my family's Catholic church world. There's a lot of blind faith too. It's interesting, and it might have been begrudging, but Joe Biden was a pro-choice Democrat, but actually his ideology was pro-life. But that's the issue that people have is if you say something like this, I'm pro-life, but what you do with your body under certain circumstances is up to you, then I say you're not pro-life. That means you're pro-choice. And I think there's a lot of virtue signaling. I've talked about it to the end of times because there's people who have been in situations where they understand and have empathy towards the reason for being pro-life. And then there's people that don't, that are hardcore, whether it's rape or incest or whatever. You have to birth this child. That's a hard line they take. The problem is the Republican Party has been split because there are plenty of reasonable people that understand that in most cases, abortions are a difficult decision to make. And in a lot of cases, it's not even a decision you're making. It's just what it's called, when you have to have surgery to remove a fetus that either has abnormalities that will make it so that they will absolutely not have a life outside of the womb. And in some states, you cannot, you'd have to wait for that fetus that has passed you'd have to birth it. And in some cases, people die of sepsis and get other, I think we know all of this, but I realize to a lot of people, you lose them. I'll get comments from people and they'll say, Dave, you lost me when you said you were progressive. Like, I no longer started listening when I heard X, Y, and Z. And to those people, I think that's not who you're trying to win over if you're trying to win over someone who's voting, because they're not changing their mind for any reason. It's the reasonable people, and women vote more than men at a much higher level. Men will tell you who they're voting for, but women show up to the polls. And more women than not think we should live in a world where the government doesn't control whether or not you can, take those matters into your own hands and make that difficult decision you have to make. I personally, when it comes down to it, trust people to make the best decision they can with the information they have. And when it comes to being with a doctor, you're with someone who has spent a lot of years in medical school to help you make the best decisions for what to do with your body, not somebody, respectfully, who is a reality TV star, who, by the way, Trump is pro-choice for the most part. It's interesting, though, that what might cost him the election if he loses is the fact that he got Roe v. Wade overturned. He's trying to backpedal now and say, no, I think it should be a state's decision. Everyone was pretty much content with where it was. To be quite honest, the Republican Party leaderships would have preferred being able to run on that fear versus the result and the consequence of them actually overturning the election, which is becoming the greatest blow for the Republican electorate in a long, long time. It is a losing issue for them. So people often say, well, ask yourself this: are you better now than you were 4 years ago? That's the big question. Here are the economics of gross GDP, which is one of the main indicators as to the health of the country.
Just a little historical perspective, and we're going to compare the U.S. to the other major economies of the world. And you go back to 1980, you can see the growth rates weren't all that different. But around the 2000 period, we just took off. And we left them in the dust. We've continued to leave them in the dust. And in fact, the IMF last week came out with new projections that show that our growth is going to accelerate even more relative to these other countries. And let me also, though, since we are going to have an election next week, do a scorecard here on the last two presidents. Donald Trump thinks this economy is in the toilet. In fact, under Joe Biden, it grew faster than it did under Donald Trump. 3.1% average GDP growth under Biden, 2.8% under Trump, and this corrects for all the COVID things. These are straight down the middle of the fairway numbers. And then you can see that growth, in fact, has turned into a much stronger economic performance for average Americans. GDP per capita is a way to think about.
You might say, look, I can't afford the price of groceries. I understand corporate greed is ridiculous. It should be one of the biggest concerns for whoever wins the election. I really like what was said by John Oliver on last week tonight when he talked about, look, both candidates are flawed. Kamala has changed her opinion on fracking. She's changed her opinion from something she said in the primaries to how she is now. And Trump is, of course, flawed for a lot of the reasons I already shared. The question you have to pose to yourself is which of these politicians do I want to be able to push in the right direction? In the end, in a democracy, you can have a politician with a good moral compass or not, but what is really important is what are they going to do for the people, not what are they going to do for their rich benefactors or the elite, and of course the debt that came from cutting taxes to the ultra wealthy, things like that. What's interesting is we're watching 2020 play out again in real time. We're watching the doubt being sowed, and we're watching this idea that. They call it a red mirage, right? A lot of votes come in after the election polls close for mail-in ballots and people who voted early and all of that. In some states, they don't count those votes until after the polls have closed, which is wild because you might go to bed seeing that there is a 53% of the vote in, say, Pennsylvania is red, and then you might wake up and it's 49%. You go, what happened? And no, did they find a bunch of ballots on a truck somewhere and make things up? No, they just were counting a demographic that had decided to vote early. That'll probably be less of an issue in this election as last election, as the earlier vote is less one-sided. As remember, last election, Trump said, don't vote early. Now, I think everyone knows it's a good idea to vote as early as possible. It will free up the election polls on days like today, Election Day. Here's the unearthed audio of Steve Bannon from 2020. He explained exactly what he thought would have happened, and he ended up becoming absolutely right. Even with that said, he's still promoting Trump, even though he's well aware that, it was that rhetoric where Trump said he didn't lose the election that inspired a lot of people to try to take matters into their own hands. What Trump is going to do is declare victory. That doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. He's just going to say they stole it. Trump is going to do some crazy shit. And again, that's exactly what happened in 2020 after, people from judges from all over the country, after, there was disputes in the legal system. It pretty much turned out that there was zero election fraud, to the point in which I think Fox had to pay something like $600 million in a defamation lawsuit to Dominion. Voting booths. I mean, it was an absolute bloodbath. It cost a lot of people a lot of money because it was a fair election. It'll probably be a fair election today. We'll report if there's anything that comes out that speaks to the contrary, but that's where it has been so far. And if you want to catch up on all the election news, I actually shared on the Morning Rush Hour podcast today some of the wild instances of the district attorneys of different cities saying, hey, get your militia out of here, F around and find out. They're giving public service updates about the validity of each election. So if you really want to follow it closely, you're watching democracy play out. It's getting a little ugly, but it is holding firm. Let me know what you guys think. We'll be back with more content right after this.